this is part 2 of the video that I posted last week where I listed off my top prose authors, my favorite prose authors, and then this week we're going to dig a little bit more into why they're my favorites, giving examples from their books of what makes, I mean, we talked about why they were my favorites, but what makes them favorites of mine through their text, as well as comparing it against a couple of other authors that I don't love the prose as much for. I'm gonna lean less on that and more on examples of positive prose, but I do think that some contrast is helpful for better describing why these ones stand out so strongly. As I said in the other video, this is about my favorite prose, the things that really stand out for me, the things that are elevated to really excellent for my taste. So your list will look different from mine, but this is my list and these are the examples why. Oh, one last point before we start. I did make a point to make sure that every quote that I'm reading off is spoiler free. So whether you've read the books or not, you're safe to hear these quotes unless you're especially spoiler sensitive, but there's no relevant reveals or plot threads mentioned or explored in any of the excerpts. We're starting with Scott Lynch. The thing with Lynch, the reason I cited in the last video for Lynch is because he will, for everything, for world building, for setting, for characters, everything he does with a flourish. He will never find a mundane way to describe a thing. And it's not in this overindulgent, exhaustive kind of way. It's in this way that is so fun to read and adds so much excitement to the scene, in my opinion. So I'm gonna give 2 examples, though with the Lies of Locke Lamora, I had to stop myself from pulling more examples because as I kept reading, I just kept loving everything. Okay, so this has probably my favorite character introduction ever in any book. I quote it all the time, so you maybe might have heard it before, but this is Locke's character introduction. This is when, well, he's being sold as an orphan boy, and the man selling him is explaining why he just wants to be rid of the kid. He says, if he had a bloody gash across his throat and a physicker was trying to sew it up, Lamora would steal the needle and thread and die laughing. He steals too much. That's just a bonus. That doesn't count in the 2 quotes. I'm just talking now. Okay, but now to the quotes. Now we have 2 quotes from the Lies of Locke Lamora. First of all, this is dialogue between 2 characters that are about to run a heist and are currently in disguise. I'm wearing clothes that will be full of sweat in several minutes. I am dumb enough to walk around Camor without a blade of any sort. Also, he said with a hint of ponderous regret, I am entirely fictional. Oh, I'm very sorry to hear that, Master Fairwhite, said Caldo. Then we skip down a little bit. My attendant will be along any moment, Locke said as he stepped aboard the barge. His name is Grumman, and he too suffers from a slight case of being imaginary. Merciful gods, said Callo. It must be catching. I love this because it's dumb. Like, these are 2 characters that are both in on the heist, and this is just them mucking about. There's no reason for them to be having this conversation other than to show that they, even when they don't need to be in character, even when they're fooling no one, will goof around all the time. But also, this gives the reader information about what they're pulling off, about what they're in disguise as, what their plan is. So rather than having characters sit around a board meeting and discuss their plan, it's built into the dialogue in this character moment that exposes that the characters are entirely too goofy. that even when no one is looking, they act this way. So it gives a peek into the character as well as a peek into the plan, all in this funny, humorous, adorable way. One last quote. This is a character that's trying to create a distraction. No, Prudence was out. Bug had to win. The presence of that rubbish pile made a great and glorious stupidity very possible. He was in the air before another thought crossed his mind. Arms out, falling backwards, staring up into the hot, near-noon sky with the confident assurance of all 12 of his years that death and injury were things reserved solely for people that weren't Bug. He screamed as he fell, in wild exultation, just to be sure that he had the foot patrol's unwavering attention. The scene goes on, he falls in the rubbish pile, and it says, he would reevaluate his own claims to immortality when all this was over. I could give a million more quotes, but the point of the matter remains. Something as simple as a kid falling off a roof into a rubbish pile to cause a distraction is instead said with such flourish, with how all 12 years of his life had created this assurance in him of exactly how little it would actually affect him. And even the reflection after it's all said and done and it was a little bit less pleasant than he had anticipated, it's still the way that he describes that he's, maybe that wasn't the smartest plan, is still just said with such a flourish. I love it. Okay, next we're going to talk about Abercrombie. So in the last video, I mentioned how he really relies on character dialogue and on their exploration and their conversations to show off his prose. And a lot of it is to do with getting to know a character a lot through their dialogue, but he also builds out the world through that. And he really he leans on characters. And that's what makes, in my opinion, the way he writes characters is what makes his prose shine. I'll give a couple of examples. You want to impress a girl? Take a bunch of flowers. Flick gave a sad sigh. You want to impress a king of the northern men? Bring a sack of heads. 'Tis a sorry observation, said Clover, but only the truer for that. Don't think much of flowers myself, said Shola. No? Never saw the point of 'em. They've got no point. That's the point. She tipped her head to the side, thinking that one through. Downside was frowning at the Shaka corpses, weighing his axe and wondering where to start. Never thought of myself as a man who fills sacks with heads. No one sets off in that direction, said Clover, puffing out his cheeks one more time. But before you know it, there you bloody are. It's through the dialogue that we learn what the plan is, that we get to know the characters a little bit better, the way that they see the world and the way that they ration, and you get to know their personalities quite well through this very small interaction. I think, anyway, that's the way I see Abercrombie's prose. By the way, I know I did 2 quotes for The Lies of Locke Lamora, but I'm going to attempt to just do 1 quote per author, even though I have selected multiple quotes for each author, because otherwise this video will be forever long. So now we're going to show a contrasting thing. So what I love about Lynch and Abercrombie is that they find ways to say something with a flourish. They add extra words unnecessary. While you could just plainly state something, they find a more indulgent way to say it, but they do it in a way that draws you in closer, that makes use of the needs of the scene and bakes it into that, so that oftentimes the information that the reader needs to have is baked into a scene that exposes the character or exposes the world, and that builds things out more, but also, especially with Lynch, does it in a way that's such a creative way of expressing it. So I'm going to show you, in contrast, a scene that adds a lot of extra elements to better ground the scene and show what the characters are doing while they're talking, but it ends up being, I'll say, less artful, and instead it's just an over-physicalization where it ends up making the scene more jarring and jagged to read. I'm going to pull a clip from an old video where I was reviewing this book, I'm pretty sure, and just insert it here rather than going and finding the quote again. Of course, in editing, I realized that I didn't read the quote in the wrap-up video. I just put it on screen, so here we go. She cocked her head. The what? Inside, Quint said, nodding at the boat. Did you see anything unusual there? All landfolk things are unusual, Lurk said flatly, then furrowed her brow in concentration. But there was a strange object there, shaped sort of like this. She pressed her elbows together, making a sharp angle. But when I touch it, it moves like this or this. Keeping her elbows pressed against each other, she widened, then closed the angle between them. It's hard and very shiny. Is it important? Quint nodded. It's a sextant. Okay, I'm tired of reading this. Do you see what I'm saying? There's so much physicalization. Every line of dialogue has to be accompanied with some sort of movement. The attempt is to ground the scene, but it ends up, at least for me, distracting me from the scene because I'm picturing all this movement as I'm going, and it's just constantly interrupting the dialogue. Hopefully that illustrated it well. Next we're going to talk about, well, actually next on the list was Qin Liu. And sadly, I won't be reading any quotes from him in this video, though I tried. But the reason is because the thing that I I said makes him stand out especially is how well he can take something in just a few pages and bake so much into it, how much impact he can have, how much he can pull from characters and from culture and from scenes in a short story format. And he does that in his longer novels in shorter arcs that are all under a larger arc, but he also does it extraordinarily in his short story collections. The problem is, to illustrate that, I would have to read such a large chunk of text, and I couldn't find, though I tried, a really shorthand way of doing this. I do think that Kin Liu is an especially talented short story writer, as well as his large novels are extraordinary as well. So I would say if you want an example of this, just pull up one of his short story collections, read the Kindle sample, just read one of his short stories. Maybe it'll illustrate it. I think in every single one of his short stories, even if the story isn't to your taste, he shows off what he can do as a writer. So next we'll talk about Frederick Bachman, who I mentioned does this repetitive thing where he'll lean on emphasizing things again and again, or hammering in a point a little bit too hard, only to, at the climax of that build, subvert expectations and take you in a totally different direction. I mean, there's a lot of things that Bachman does that I think is extraordinary. I think just reading quotes from him is oftentimes enough to say, whoa, he can say a lot in a few words. But talking about technique that makes someone stand out, I think that this is something that he's really amazing at. So I'm giving an example from Beartown for this one. The book opens up, this is the opening lines of the book. It says, "Late one evening toward the end of March, a teenager picked up a double-barreled shotgun, walked into the forest, put the gun to someone else's forehead, and pulled the trigger. This is the story of how we got there." Then on the next page, it starts off with bang, 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 bang. So it starts off with the promise of what's to come, and then immediately we start hearing the banging of what we think is a gun. And the book introduces the town, it introduces people of the town, and in between each introduction, it gives another bang, bang, bang. So it might introduce aspects of the town, like, it's as if nature and man were fighting a tug of war for space. Either way, the town is losing. It's been a very long time since it won at anything. More jobs disappear each year, and with them, the people, and the forest devours one or two more abandoned houses each season. So it has introductions like that of the town, it has introductions of people, and it continues to go through that, and with each introduction, we get another insertion of bang, 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 until it all builds to the introduction of the ice hockey team, where it then says, "Then they wake up to the sound of a bang, and they smile." And then we introduce Kevin, the hope of the ice hockey team. And we realize that the bang, bang, bang was coming from him shooting hockey pucks over and over and over again, practicing non-stop, and his determination to play. Then we continue to introduce aspects of the town, we continue to introduce people, and then of course the main conflict comes up, and it all circles back to the promise at the beginning of the book as well. There are better examples of this that are more concise, where I could just read to you a whole scene of something building and building and building, and you have this sense of dread, you know exactly where it's going, and then it subverts your expectations and it builds somewhere else instead. And then you either have a sigh of relief or a sigh of even greater dread. But I couldn't figure out how to do that without getting deeper into the book and deeper into at least spoiling a reveal. So I had to just go with the main setup of the story and how he builds on that. Hopefully it illustrated it well enough. I'm not sure that it did. Okay, next we're going to read an excerpt from Chess Story by Stefan Zweig. What I mentioned about him is also his build-up, not so much his subversion, but he focuses on, at least the short stories that I've read of him have all been very focused on a fixation, on an obsession. And the way he does it is he writes these short clipped sentences a lot of times. So you're in the head of the person, and a lot of times it even seems as erratic as the person is meant to be depicted as. So this is about a man who is in isolation torture and who is slowly unraveling because of it. This truly indescribable state of affairs continued for 4 months. Now 4 months is easy to write. So many letters, no more, no less. It's easy to say, 4 months, 2 syllables. It takes no time at all to form the words, 4 months. But there's no way to describe, to gauge, to delineate. Not for someone else, not for yourself. How long time lasts in dimensionlessness, in timelessness. And you can't explain to anyone how it eats at you and destroys you. This nothing and nothing and nothing around you. Always this table and bed and wash basin and wallpaper, and always the silence, always the same guard pushing food in without looking at you. Always the same thoughts in that nothingness, revolving around a single thought until you go mad. It goes on. It actually goes on for pages and pages, but that little excerpt hopefully gives the explanation of what I'm talking about. He adjusts his prose to show the madness that's seeping in. And in a letter from an unknown woman, which does it probably even more aggressively, he adjusts his prose even more to lean into that obsession and the intensity of thought that I think is a big reason why Zweig writes these types of narratives so unbelievably well. I've read obsessive characters before, but I think the reason why his strike me so much is in the way he adjusts his prose to match that state of mind so well that it makes me feel like I'm there with them. Okay, the example that I'm giving on the negative is from an author that I very much like. But I've said for years that Brandon Sanderson's prose is not my favorite. And it's funny because I've heard other people talk about Brandon's prose, and yet no one brings up the thing that gets me the most. So the two examples I gave in prose tools that I really liked were in Bachman and Zweig, in the repetition that they would use to lean on to build the tension or the mystery or the intrigue. And for Brandon, I love his stories, but he relies on the same prose formula over and over and over again so exhaustively. And it's a prose formula that I don't like personally. So what he'll do is he will say the person did this doing this. Kelsier stood up crossing the room. And he'll rely on that prose style so repetitively that you'll find it. Open any Brandon book, any at all. I grabbed this one because I did. But any Brandon book, open up to a random page, you'll probably find it very quickly. So just in the prologue, which is under 2 pages, that's all I'm going to read from, the prologue of book 1, so it's not going to be spoilery. But you'll find several of these just in that tiny span of space. I'm just gonna read those, though, to illustrate. I just realized that I was holding up book 3, so I'm now trying again. I just read a bunch of excerpts, but it's okay because it's in all the books, so we'll do it again. Ah! So book 1 of the Mistborn trilogy, I'm just doing the prologue. I'm starting and I'm just gonna skip through and point this out to you in several lines and then we'll move on. Oh, it's right at the very beginning. Lord Trusting frowned, glancing up at the ruddy midday sky as his servants scuttled forward, opening a parasol over Tressing and his distinguished guest. Instead, they simply worked with bowed heads, moving about their work with quiet apathy. The obligator turned, raising an eyebrow. The tattoos were enormous, reaching all the way across his brow and up the sides of his nose. You should see City Ska, Trusting, the obligator said, turning back to watch the ska workers. The obligator nodded, standing quietly in his gray robes. The obligator looked down, checking his pocket watch, then glanced up at the sun. Okay, that'll be enough. That's just, the prologue is half of a page, and then I read the next page. And it's one of those things, and of course Mistborn is one of his earlier works, but it's something that once you see it, you can't stop seeing it, and it's everywhere, and it's in recent books as well. It's one of Brandon's writing quirks. He's found a sentence structure that he really likes. This person did the thing, doing the thing, or doing another thing, and it's something that he uses ad nauseum, and because I've found the pattern and because it's so frequent, I see it constantly. I use this as contrast because I've oftentimes said that I don't love Brandon's prose, but I never really go into why, and I guess now I'm finally doing it. But also, or well, I mean, like, that's not the only thing, but that's the pattern that I see. It just, my brain snags on it constantly. But also just to illustrate kind of a contrasting example of how repetition can be a negative, because once your brain snags on a repetitive phrase or, you know, certain authors that will use the same word to describe something over and over and over again, or they'll use the same type of descriptions over and over and over again. Abercrombie can do this. And once the reader's brain sees it, it can turn into a distraction. So that's the point of me illustrating repetition used purposefully versus repetition used, I'm gonna guess unintentionally, but because it's used so much, it can become a distraction. Okay, we're gonna end this video on just a couple of fun quotes from some of my favorite prose authors that just love playing with language, and I think I love it. So we're gonna start with Pratchett. He will take these turns of phrases that are common and then kind of twist them a little bit so that the meaning is slightly different. This is an easy example. You had to hand it to the patrician, he admitted grudgingly. If you didn't, he sent men to come and take it away. Another example. Corporal Nobbs, he rasped. Why are you kicking people while they're down? Safest way, sir, said Nobby. Sometimes he'll use a phrase that you're familiar with and you know what it means, and then the way characters respond, it surprises you in the way it's actually being used, and it's just, it leans into the humor as well as, you know, making the reader think a little bit differently. One last quote, because he can also do the thing that I've praised other authors for, where he will use dialogue to build on the characters and in a surprising way. But all this business about kings and lords, it's against basic human dignity. We're all born equal. It makes me sick. Never heard you talk this way before, Frederick, said Nobby. It's Sergeant Colin to you, Nobby. I just think it's just such a fun way to explore characters by showing through the dialogue what they're really like. Okay. Then finally, we're gonna talk about the Air Affair. I almost included Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy too, but my goodness, this video is, I don't know how long it'll be in editing, but in filming. The Air Affair is one of my new favorite prose authors. Every line is so funny and so clever, much like how Pratchett and Adams and other excellent authors are. You nearly killed 8 people, I managed to gasp out loud. My count was closer to 12, returned Havisham as she opened the door. And anyhow, you can't nearly kill someone. Either they're dead or they're not. Okay, and this one is introducing Thursday, the main character of this particular series, introducing her and explaining why her name is as it is, and you're just going along learning information about a character in just a basic informational way, and then it kind of takes a twist, and I'll show you. I was born on a Thursday, hence the name. My brother was born on a Monday, and they called him Anton. Go figure. My mother was called Wednesday, but she was born on a Sunday. I don't know why. And my father had no name at all. His identity and existence had been scrubbed by the Chrono Guard after he went rogue. To all intents and purposes, he didn't exist at all. It didn't matter. He was always Dad to me. So we're starting off with a simple explanation of Thursday's name, and then we go into the names of the rest of the family, and it's a bit odd, and then it ends up explaining to us for the very first time that her father's name has been scrubbed from existence, and so they're not allowed to use it or reference him ever again, even though he does pop up in the story occasionally. But this is how we're introduced to the concept that people are scrubbed from existence, and now the people that, even though they know that person, they're not allowed to talk about that person in mixed company. The Air Affair was another particularly difficult one for me to find excerpts from, because while there are plenty of funny little lines like this that show off that, you know, Ford is hilarious, the author is hilarious, but there are scenes that I wanted to read out to you that the back and forth of it and the way the characters are dancing around each other really displays the author's mastery of the English language and of humor, and just please read Jasper Ford's work. Anyway, like I said, this video leaned far more heavily on reading quotes that I love than on focusing on the negative, but I did want to give some contrast and kind of talk about that as well. Again, these are prose authors that I personally love, but I understand that it's not going to be the same for every person. I also understand that reading quotes out of their full context might not be as satisfying to you as it is to me, having read the full context. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope the video was of some use to you, and I would love to hear what it is that makes certain authors stand out in their prose styles more than others if you have any sort of interest in this conversation. Please do chat with me more in the comments. I would love to continue discussing with you. I'll see you again soon. Bye.